Hey everybody, it's Camera Tim, and I'm going to show you how to make thumbnails like these in DaVinci Resolve and stuff. With pretty much any thumbnail you see on YouTube, there's basically 4 steps that you can break all of them down to at most. And if you want to skip to a specific portion of this video, check the description where there's chapter markers with specific subjects and sub-subjects. Whatever the bullet point things are called, you know. And this right here is not a thumbnail, this is what we in the professional world call a button. It's very attention-seeking though, don't click it. Now these 4 steps I'm going to show you don't even have to be all incorporated into every single thumbnail. In fact, a lot of good thumbnails don't have all 4 of them. But I'm just a guy who's too nitpicky, so I did all 4 of them anyways. But these are just meant to serve as guidelines for when you're making your thumbnails and things to keep in mind. But also how you can just do all of this directly inside of Resolve. And the 4 things are the subject image, the background, the foreground, and the additional graphics. The subject image is usually a picture of the creator or the person or subject that you're talking about. Typically, this involves removing the background and highlighting the subject or person in some sort of way. The background is usually used to set the mood or support the color scheme of the overall image without being too noisy. The foreground usually consists of imagery or something that conveys the overall story of the thumbnail. Essentially, the critical part for illustrating the content of the video. And then the additional graphics part is any text, logos, or arrows, or any sort of graphic material that either points or guides the viewer's attention in some way. And again, not all 4 of these are used in every good thumbnail, but they are key aspects of good thumbnails. Now we're going to start out with cutting out the subject, and in this case it's just going to be an image of a person so that this example is easy to follow. And there are also 4 primary ways of doing this. I found the easiest way to record thumbnails is to just record something in OBS of a screen recording, so that way I can skim through and find the exact frame I want for the thumbnail that I'm using. Now just a quick disclaimer, I recorded these in a flat profile, so I did color on them, so that's why I'm going to make each of these a fusion clip, so that way the color doesn't interfere. You don't have to worry about this. This is only if you're recording a log profile or something similar to that. But now let's look at the 4 different ways that we can cut images out. So we're going to go ahead and go into Fusion. And also, if you've never used Fusion before, don't worry, I'm going to explain each of these steps in detail so that you're not confused and it's really easy to follow. So anytime you open up Fusion on one of your clips, you're going to see a media in. This is what's coming from the edit page, and then you'll see a media out, and this is what's going back into the edit page. And the first thing I'm going to do is select this media in here, and I'm going to click on my background node, and that's going to create a merge. And what this does is it stacks 2 layers on top of each other. Whatever's going into the green is going to the foreground, whatever's going into the yellow is going into the background. So I can click on this merge node, and if I press Ctrl T, that'll flip-flop which one's on top and which one's on the bottom. So you can see if I move this right here, you can see the background's here on the bottom. If I change this color here, you can see it very clearly. But I'm just going to go ahead and reset this. But we're basically keeping this background here as a template. We'll get back to it later. I'm going to go ahead and bring this alpha all the way down so that it shows up as a transparent background as well. But let's go ahead and click on our media in, and this is the first step, and this is a studio only effect. The other 3 that I'm going to show you are part of the free version. So if you don't have studio, you can skip to the next 3 options. But if you have studio, we can go ahead and press Shift Space, and we're going to type in Magic Mask. We'll just go ahead and add our Magic Mask here. We're going to set mode to better, and all we have to do here is just draw around the entire subject here. I'm going to do a very bad job. And then we have our cutout, and we can go in, and if I press and hold Control and then scroll on my mouse wheel, I can see if I need to refine any of those details. I can see that the Pokeball wants to be included, but I'm going to say no, get out of here. So I'm going to switch my stroke mode to subtract, and that way I can just draw on the spot that I don't want to have included, and it removes it. And we can also double check if we click on this button here that shows our color channels. We can switch it to alpha. And now we can see if there's any little spot that we've missed. Anything that's white is being included, anything that's black is being cut out. And it looks like we've done a pretty good job here. I probably messed up here, but I'm not going to worry about it. Actually, I am, because I can't help myself. And now that we've cut that out, we can just make sure we have Magic Mask selected. And we can just hit Transform, which is this icon here. And now we can move this around freely however we want. And the second option is to use a green screen. And this green screen is courtesy of my friend Bax. So let's just say this is the part that I wanted to cut out. So I'm going to go ahead back into the Fusion page. And what I'm going to use here is called the delta keyer. So I'm going to select my media in. I'm going to do shift space and I'm going to select delta keyer. And then what I can do with the delta keyer here is I can find this eyedropper under background color. I can click and hold and then drag, and then you will see we have a color picker on our green screen that we can just select a good part of green. Most places on this green screen is actually pretty clean. So I'm going to go from right there probably. And then it looks pretty clean so far, but if we notice a really key issue is we have some fringing here. And if we go up to our color up here, if we switch and we see all these color channels here, we can select alpha, and this will show us how much detail we have and have left to cut out. We can see that we have some stuff here on the edge, we have some stuff up here, we have some stuff down there. And normally you would mask something like that, you could. And sometimes there's more detail though that we would have to cut out. That makes it even more cumbersome. So the way that we actually are going to clean this up is a little bit more easy and will also help us actually retain a little bit more hair detail. So we're actually going to use what's called a clean plate. And the purpose of a clean plate is to basically just get only the green screen and the background, so it has a better idea of how to distinguish what is green and what is not. What we're going to do is we're going to click inside our node tree here again, and we're going to press shift space and select clean plate. We're going to go ahead and click and drag into our clean plate from our media in. And then that way, we can pull this up into our first viewer by pressing 1. And now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to click and drag from our background color. And you'll notice that it's kind of doing the opposite of what the delta keyer was doing. It's actually keeping the green in and cutting and everything else out. And that's because we're trying to fill this in with just green. So let's just go ahead and drop it there. And then with these controls, we're going to essentially try to just cut out these hair follicles so that we can try and keep that detail while filling everything else with green. So if we just increase our threshold here just a little bit, we can go ahead and erode and kind of just keep going while still trying to keep that green in there till we get basically most of the hair out. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but we're going to go ahead and just call it good there. And then we can grow our edges and just kind of fill all that little space in. If it doesn't fill it all the way, we can just check fill and it'll also do that. So if I uncheck fill and if I click fill here, it would essentially do the same thing. But now we have a more filled in green screen, so that has a better idea of what to distinguish between what is green and what is not. So now if I right click on the output here and drag into the delta keyer, we'll get a clean plate option. If we do this, you'll see it cuts out more of that outside stuff that we don't want and actually retains more hair detail that we do want. And there's a little bit up here that for some reason it doesn't cut out, and we can easily mask this out. But if I pull up my delta keyer again, you can see this is a much cleaner key. We still have a lot of those loose hair pieces. And if we wanted to do an extra fine job on here, which we don't have to, I'm going to go ahead and pull this up and go back to my color tab so I can see it a little bit better. And we'll get to the masking out in a second. But let's just say we wanted to clean up this fringing just even a little bit more. The easiest way to do that would just be to go into matte, and you can increase the low end of the threshold a little bit. We can go back into our alpha viewer just to see it a little bit cleaner. We don't really want to drag this up too much because we want to keep that hair in there. We can also bring up our clean background to try and cut away some of that background while keeping the foreground in. We can bring up the foreground so that we can retain that hair detail without bringing the background too much in. Or we could even bring in restore fringe, and that'll try to bring in some of that detail back in here around him as well. But those are some ways that you can play with it if you're not getting the absolute best key. I don't think most of these are necessary, so we're just going to call it good here. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of these because I actually kind of like it better without it. But again, the option is there if you need it. So we're going to go ahead and bring this back to color. And now just to take care of this top part, actually, what we can do is we can actually just bring in a merge, click off, and bring in a background. We're going to just put this into the merge. And then what we want to do is just flip these around. So if I press Control T on the merge, it'll switch the sides that they're on. And then I can just, on the background, drag alpha all the way down. And now we can just mask whatever is going into the foreground of the merge, so it masks the entirety of it instead of just portions of it. And that's the purpose of putting this merge in here for now. So we can go ahead and bring in a rectangle. I'm going to drag it onto the merge. I'm going to select invert, and then I'll just drag this up, and then we can just cut out that top part that we don't need. And boom, problem solved. And so we have a pretty nice looking key here. And now if we click on our merge, and we can add a transform after this, and now anything that's going into this transform, the transform can now move. So I can bring the size down, move this all around, just click and drag it around, and now we just have a perfectly nice cut out person that we can just move around. But in order to not get too confused with what's going on here, what we can do is we can just highlight all of our nodes here, and then we can right click and select group, or instead of grouping it, we can highlight them, press shift space, and we can select underlay. And we can name the underlay as we want. So we can call this person, but still have everything visible. You can do the same thing with the group by pressing F2 whenever you have the group highlighted. For now, I think I'm going to just make this all into a group. And once again, press F2, call this person. But now everything's just confined in here so that if we want to just move the person around, everything that's coming out of here is just the person. The third method is what's called difference keying. So we're actually going to go into this example right here. Now, difference keying is interesting because we have another type of a version of a clean plate. But now instead of using a green screen, let's assume you don't have one. What you can actually do is something like this, where you have yourself in the foreground, but then keep recording and then move outside of the background. And now you have this clean plate. So what we can do with this is we're just going to find the part that we want to keep as part of the thumbnail. Let's just say it's this part. And I'm actually just going to cut it. By default, you can press Control/. I have mine set to C for split clip. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that part. And then scroll ahead to where the background is just by itself, which is right here. And I'm going to press C again to cut the clip. And then I'm going to drag it on top of it. So now I can also freeze these in time if I want to, just to make it a little bit easier. You don't have to do this part. I have this set to Shift F. What you can also do if you don't have that bound to a keyboard shortcut is you can right click, go to change clip speed, and select freeze frame. But now that these are bound, I can just make these into a fusion clip. Normally you could right click and select new fusion clip, but I can just select Alt E because that's what I have it bound to. It's combined those together into a single fusion clip. So now if I go into Fusion, you can see we have both instances right here. Just click on this merge and delete it because it's not going to be useful for us. So for this media in 1, I'm just going to rename these just so it's easier. I'm going to call this foreground. And then this one is just a clean plate. So I can call this clean plate, select the foreground. I'm going to press shift space, and then I'm going to type in difference keyer. I'm actually going to move the foreground into the foreground because that's what it actually should be in. And then the clean plate is going to go into the background. So the clean plate or the background will go into the yellow input of the difference keyer. The foreground goes into the green input. And you can already kind of see what's happening here. And this background that I have is not really conducive for very good difference keying, but it can still kind of work in this instance. So I'm still using it. But normally having it behind a plain background that's not the same color as anything you're wearing or what you look like is usually the best case scenario for this. So because the difference keyer is looking for differences in both the images, if your image is noisy, that can tend to cause issues. So what you can do is under your clean plate, you can add a blur, and that can sometimes help clean up the noisy parts a little bit. So you can just add a little bit of blur, and then under your difference keyer, you can just a little bit more easily cut that part out. And you can even copy the blur and put that into the foreground as well. And we can do a little bit of a better job at cutting this stuff out. Make it a little bit blurrier here. What's nice about this is we can actually use this as a mask over itself. So I can actually just copy the foreground over here. I'm going to press Control C, copy, and now I'm going to paste it over here. And then I can even just use this key as a matte. I can just output it into the mask of this foreground once again. And then if I preview this, now we have a little bit more of an accurate cutout. That's not quite as harsh or has jagged edges. And we could even go in and refine this aspect right here. I can just add a polygon mask. I'm actually going to add two because there's stuff I want to keep in and stuff I want to cut out. So for the one that I want to cut out, I can just go to this mask right here, right click and drag this in, and I'm going to select garbage matte because I want to keep the garbage out. So I can select garbage. I can turn off this polygon real quick as I draw. And I want to just cut this part out here. I can go ahead and turn that on and you can see it cuts it out. And then with this polygon mask right here, I'm going to right click and drag, and I want this to go into solid matte. And this is what I want to keep in. I'm going to turn off so I can draw. I'm going to just do a rough job right here. I know this is a little bit of transparency here that I can keep in as well. So I'm just going to draw that. And then I can turn this on. And now we have it kept in on the solid matte. And I can even soften this mask as well so I can incorporate it a little bit easier and just make sure the garbage matte doesn't override what the solid matte is trying to keep in. And also at any time you're looking at your Fusion viewers, what you can do if you want to just automatically set it to fit without having to click on this and manually setting to fit, if you have this screen selected, just press F and it automatically sets it to fit. So now that we've added this back in, we can just drag this into our media out, and now we have a cleaner image. Now, of course, this isn't perfect, and again, with my background, it's not going to appear as clean, but these are just some techniques that you can use to get a cleaner key. And once we add the outline, it's going to be less apparent as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go back, and I'm going to show you the fourth method, which is manually drawing the mask. And this can be the most tedious, but in some cases, it might even be the better option. So we're going to go ahead and just go in here. And let's say I just wanted to keep this. The very simple way to do this part is just to add a polygon mask on the media in. I'm going to go ahead and turn the polygon mask off. And we can just manually draw it. And once we have our mask drawn, we can turn on our polygon mask. And now we have our cutout. Now let's say we wanted to make an additional cutout. We can just make another polygon mask inside of this one. I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off. And we're just going to draw a really quick mask here. And once we turn it back on, we can go under paint mode and select subtract. And that cuts that part out as well. And we can always soften our edges too. So if we just add a little bit of softness here, go to polygon 1, and let's just turn off the show controls so that we can see our edges a little bit easier. So we can just add a little bit of soft edge. And that just cleans that up a little bit nicer. And we have our cutout. Now to make an actual outline on any one of these subject images, there's multiple ways to do that. But I found the most easy way is to add an Erode Dilate node and also a brightness contrast node. So we bring in the brightness contrast node first. We're going to go ahead and click on brightness contrast. And we're going to drag the media into the brightness contrast. I can go ahead and bring this into the first viewer here so that we can see if we make our adjustments, we can see what adjustments we're making onto it. And then after brightness contrast, we're going to go ahead and shift space and we're going to add an Erode Dilate node. And what Erode Dilate does is essentially looks at the edges and then either increases or decreases them. A very simplistic way of how that works. And we're going to change this filter to circle so that it doesn't look pixely or boxy. And if I increase the amount here, I'm going to make sure Erode Dilate is being previewed. So I press 1 on Erode Dilate. And if I increase the amount, you can see that this is what we're getting. And if we merge the Erode Dilate on top of the media in by dragging the output of Erode Dilate onto the output of media in 1, it merges it on top of itself. And then we can actually just flip this merge by selecting the merge and pressing Control T. And that's going to put the outline underneath. And then all we have to do with brightness contrast is select pre-divide post multiply and then bring lift to 1. And now we have our white outline. And then with the Erode Dilate node, we can see how big of an outline we want on it. Now you'll notice that after we have this outline here, if we put a transform after this merge, there's no outline down here. So if we moved this transform, it looks like it would get cut off. So what we actually want to do with this transform here, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to press Media in 1, and then I'm going to add a transform here. And now everything's coming from the transform. So if I shrink the size here, we get our outline at the bottom as well, if that's something that we wanted. And just to show this in our other scenarios, if we go back to our delta keyed one, so let's just go ahead and find a portion that we want. Let's just go back to this. Let's go into Fusion. So we can go from this transform, do the kind of the same thing. We're going to add a brightness contrast node as well as an Erode Dilate. And we're going to go from the transform into the brightness contrast, and from Erode Dilate back into the output of transform 1 to merge it on top of itself. And then under the merge, we press Ctrl T to flip it. And then under brightness contrast, we'll select pre-divide post multiply. And this basically means, in very, very short, that if it's an alpha, it'll stay alpha. Because if we don't check that and we bring our lift up, you'll see that it affects all the background. But if we select pre-divide post multiply, it fixes that problem. So we're going to bring lift all the way up. And then we go to Erode Dilate. And then we can select either linear, Gaussian, or circle. I'll go to circle for now. And we can just bring this up. And if we notice any abnormalities from bringing that up, we can always go back into our group and go back to our mask and take care of that. So I'll go ahead and just bring this over here, and boom, all fixed. Now the other way we can do an outline is we can use what's called edge detect. So I can go ahead and do the same thing on this one. I'm going to select transform, and then I'm going to add an edge detect. And it's going to look a little funky initially, but once again, since I accidentally put it on the middle of this, the easy way to remove it from that flow is by clicking and holding and then pressing Shift. I can remove it, I can let go of the mouse, and then that removes it from that node flow. So I can go ahead and drag transform into edge detect, and then I can add the brightness contrast after the edge detect. This kind of goes in the reverse order. So I go brightness contrast back into transform. Once again, Control T. And now with edge detect, I'm going to select grayscale edges. And then that way I can actually just change the edge detect color if I wanted to have a specific colored outline. I can change the edge width just to kind of get the rough outline of how I want the outline to look. And then in the brightness and contrast, if I wanted to be more shiny, I can just bring my gain up. And then I have a nice bright outline, but with a little splash of color to it. So this is another way of doing an outline if you wanted to do it this way. This is just another form. Or if you didn't want to do an outline, you just simply wanted to do a drop shadow, I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. You could just easily add a drop shadow node onto it and customize it however you want there. And now we're going to go on to the background element. There's a couple different ways that you can do this, and I'm going to give you a couple tools for inspiration. The first thing I'm actually going to do with this is I'm actually going to go ahead and just add another background here. I'm going to drag that on top of the output of the drop shadow, or whatever you have there. And once again, I'm going to select the merge and flip it so that it's in the background. But with this one, we can go into this background node here, and we can actually change what kind of background we want. We can select a gradient, and then if we wanted it to be top and bottom, we could just drag these points if we wanted, or I could just manually type it in, so I could have the start X and end X both be 0.5, so they're both directly in the middle. And then the start Y be 1, so it's on top, and then the end Y be 0, so it's on the bottom. And then we have our gradients that we can adjust here. So let's just say I wanted some blue on the top, and then a darker blue on the bottom. I might even go a bit deeper with this. But now we just have a clean, smooth gradient here. I'm going to go ahead and just move my image over here so it's a little bit out of the way. But we can actually build onto this background node. So let's say in these other thumbnails, you can see we have this almost like a pinwheel design. This is actually very easy to make. What we can do is we can bring in another background, but this one we're just going to make full white. So we can just drag all of these up and make it white. We're going to bring it into the first viewer over here. And we're actually going to go to image. We're going to disable auto resolution. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to make this a snapping pixel grid. So I have a predetermined width and height that I like to use. It's 48 by 30. And now what we can do, and make sure this is also set to fit as well. It might not be that by default. So just make sure the source window is set to fit. I'm going to right click inside of here. I'm going to go to options and show pixel grid. We can see each individual pixel on this background. I'm going to right click again, go to controls, and I'm going to hit snap to pixel. I'm going to go ahead and rename this. I'm going to just call this grid so we don't lose it. And then I'm going to bring in another background node. And then this one is going to be the core of our pinwheel. We're actually going to put a polygon on it. And then we can actually draw on this pixel grid to make our shape. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a rough shape here. Make a little triangle. And then to make this easier, I'm actually just going to go ahead and center it here. And then on this edge, I'm just going to make that shape here and make sure it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up. That's fine. I'm going to drag this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Good. And then just wanted to make sure that's centered. So now we have this little triangle shape here. And if I preview this background, we can see we have this triangle shape. It's constrained to the actual resolution of our canvas over here, which is really nice. So if I put this over top of our other background, now we have this part of the shape. If we click on our background, we can actually add what's called a duplicate node. So we're going to press Shift Space. I'm going to type in duplicate, not displace. We can set our copies to however many of these we want. We can go ahead and just set this. Let's just set it to 8 for now. And if we divide 360, which is a full circle, by 8, we get 45. So if we type in 45 on our angle, we now have a nice pinwheel. And what's nice is we can even do a little bit more fancy of an expression here. What we can do is we can actually right click on our angle, select an expression, click and drag this plus over copies, and then we're going to type 360 divided by copies. Now, however many copies we have, it's going to be perfectly constrained to whatever the angle is if we use a whole number. Now you'll notice that we have some missing edges here. That's actually pretty simple to take care of, but we'll get to that in a second. The thing is we can't make all of these their own individual colors because they're actually copies of each other. So if I made this background red or made it a gradient of some sort, it would all be duplicates of the same gradient, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can do that. But let's just say we wanted a gradient from top to bottom and it to flow through the whole thing. Well, that's actually pretty easy. I'm actually going to just go ahead and set this back to solid color. Keep it at black, doesn't really matter. We can actually use this as a mask. So I'm going to deselect it. I'm going to add a background. I'm going to disconnect this. I'm actually going to put the duplicate into this background and then put this background into this merge. So now if I change, let's say I make it a 4-corner, and let's say I make this red, and I make this green, and I make this blue, and I make this white. It's covering the entirety of the thing. We're effectively using this whole pinwheel as a mask. And then all we have to do with this, click on our duplicate, we can add a transform, and then we can just increase the size here to fit within the constraints. And now we have our pinwheel shape. And at any point, we can even just go back. If we pull up our grid, let's go ahead and press F to make it fit. We can click on our polygon and we can adjust the shape as needed at any given point. And then we can even click on our background here and just add a blur on top of that as well. Or we can even add the blur after this merge here so it blurs the entirety of the background. But this way we create some depth. And we do this all behind this merge so that none of this touches our original image. There are some more techniques that we can use with this, like if we wanted to have a little bit more of a textured background. Let's just go ahead and disconnect this for now. And I'm just going to go ahead and select this background, hold Shift so I can disconnect it when I click on it. And I'm just going to move these away to get them out of the way. So I'll redrag this in so we have our gradient back again. We can do something like add another background, place it in here. And with this background, we can once again set it to a 4-corner. Doesn't really matter what we do with it. I'm just going to arbitrarily choose colors here just for the sake of example. And we can do stuff like we can add a fast noise. I'm going to delete this merge here. And what I can do with this fast noise is I can use this as a displacement effect. So we can add a little bit of texture to it. So now I can select this background, add Displace. And now I can drag the fast noise into the Displace. If I increase my contrast here on this, I'm going to increase my scale. And then we can go into our Displace. We can just add a rough texture just by doing something as simple as that. You could even decrease the contrast a little bit to lessen the effect or increase the scale here. There's so much you can do with that. Displacement is a really nice tool. Or even better, I can delete these, and instead of using something like that, I can add a Mosiac blur. And I can change this to a triangle. I can decrease the pixel frequency, and now we have this interesting looking triangle shape, and we can do different weird little things with it if we wanted to. And we could even increase the random commodity. We could add a fast noise into it, plug it in, and then let's just decrease the pixels here. But we can just do something kind of crazy with this. There's plenty of options, but we have another simple background example here. Basically, the point is there's a lot of tools that you can use in order to get some sort of color fill or support to your image. But also, instead of using stuff like these, I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of these. I'm going to go up to my media pool, and we actually have a couple interesting things here. So let's say you had gameplay that you wanted to incorporate into this. I'm going to bring in all 3 of these, delete the merges, take this off the media pool. So Rocket League has this interesting characteristic where inside of replays, you can actually select a depth map, you can select the regular image, or you can add a green screen outside of anything that isn't the car or ball. So you can do some crazy stuff with this. Obviously with this, we can just add a simple delta keyer, and then we can just key that out and place that into our image and place that wherever we wanted to. But let's say we wanted to be a little bit more complex than that. This is one way of doing it. We also have the full image here, and we have a depth map. So instead of running the green screen, which we can still use, because we have this depth map here, we can actually use this as a mask in and of itself. So anything that's white will be affected, anything that's complete black will not be. And this means anything in between is only partially affected. So if I just wanted to run this through a simple blur, I could just add a blur here and make sure it's pulled up on the first viewer here. I can increase the blur size, but let's say I wanted to add the map into it so that whatever's in this foreground is not affected, everything in the background is. I can use this map and plug it into the effect mask of my blur. So I'm going to plug it into the blur, and then because we've added that, if we go to the settings of our blur, we can go to channel and set it to luminance. We have a matte that affects the background more than the foreground, almost simulating a depth of field blur. There's also a lens blur option, which I believe is only for the studio version, but this kind of works the same way. So if I plug this in, and I can use this matte once again, make sure that this is set to luminance. Once again, we have a very similar style, except it's a little bit more realistic to how an actual lens would blur it. But this is just a really cool feature that Rocket League specifically has that we could then use inside our thumbnail. And these are just a couple of the amazing background tricks that you can use inside of Fusion. Now let's just go back to this background concept and start talking about the foreground elements. Now the foreground elements typically are the things related to what the video is talking about. So as an example, if I just did something really quick, let's say I wanted to talk about this Erode Dilate node. I could add a couple screenshots and make it a point to highlight this specific node and maybe some of the controls that are belonging to it. So I can take a screenshot on Windows by pressing Shift Window S. I can just click and drag and make a screenshot. On a Mac, you can just do, I believe it's Shift Command 4 or something like that. Somebody will correct me. The text will. I can just open up Paint, paste that screenshot into here, crop it, and then I can save that as a PNG. And then I can also just look at the node itself in the inspector. I can highlight this part as well. I can go back into Paint and I can just paste right over it, crop once again, and I can save that, just call it Inspector. And I can just drag both of those right into my media pool and then drag them right into the Fusion comp. So I turn off my media pool here. I can press 1 and now I have both my screenshots in my Fusion comp, and I can just move this back. And let's just say I wanted to put this one here and then put this one in here to merge it on top. I can click on both of them and then select the transform button to add a transform beneath them, and then that way I can move them anywhere in the comp. So it looks like I'm pointing to them in some sort of way. And I can scale them up. I can even crop them with masks in case I wanted to refine exactly which part of it I wanted to keep. And we can also do a similar Erode Dilate. In order to do this, we have to make sure that this transform isn't pushing this outside of its own resolution. So the way we can do this really quickly is just by adding another background, flipping the merge by pressing Ctrl T, and then we just make this background transparent. Now we can copy the brightness contrast Erode Dilate, select the transform, paste, and then we output the transform into the brightness contrast. Bring the Erode Dilate back into the output of the transform, and then we flip that merge once again with Ctrl T. And now we have an outline here, and we can do the same exact thing with this one. First, we can just add a blank background once again, make it transparent, flip it around, and we might have to reorient the transform because for some reason it flipped it all the way out there. But we just add that brightness contrast Erode Dilate once again, paste it over here. I know all these things are in the way right now, so I'm going to move them. But with this transform 3, we can go into the brightness contrast from the Erode Dilate, flip the merge once again, and now we have outlines. And then we can just go in each of our transforms and move things around as we need to. And another simple way of doing some sort of foreground imagery is if we go back to that Rocket League example. I'm only just going to bring in a screenshot here. But let's just say you had only a screenshot of a game or a clip of a game that you pulled a screenshot from, and you just wanted to highlight a certain portion and blur out the rest of the background. Well, that's pretty easy to do. I'm going to remove these merges so we can ignore all these for now. What we can do with this is we can actually just create a merge that it goes into, but then we can put it into the foreground as well. Let's just say we wanted to blur itself, and I'm going to pull the merge up into here so that we're only blurring what's going into the background. Let's just add an ellipse mask to make this easier. I'm going to put an ellipse into the effect mask of the merge. Drag this over here. Let's just say I only wanted to highlight the ball. Well, now if I start blurring this out, we can keep the highlight of the ball because that's what we're masking out. So we can add the soft edge to it, and then we can even darken what's being blurred. We can add a brightness contrast, and I can just slot that in by just clicking, dragging, and then holding shift and then letting it go on the line when it's blue. And then I can just drag this gain down here that can really just focus on highlighting this ball so that this is the key foreground element, or if we wanted to just move what was being affected here, we can literally just make our own little spotlight here. And wherever we move this mask is what's cutting out this brightness, contrast, and blur effect. Now if we just merge this right back on top here, we're going to go ahead and flip that so it's behind the image. Could even go back in here since this is on the other side. We can click on this merge and we can flip it, and boom, I can point over here. We can even use this ellipse to make an outline circle here. I'm actually just going to copy this ellipse and then press Control-Shift-V, and that's going to make an instance of it, which means all of these parameters are parented to the original ellipse by default. And the only ones I'm going to change are solid, border width, and soft edge. So I'm going to right click on solid and select the instance, do the same thing with border width and soft edge. That means we can adjust these independently without affecting what's going on the first ellipse, but all the other parameters are still mirrored to it. And the easy thing we can do with this is just put it into a background node. I'm just going to make this background white for simplicity. Actually, no, I'm going to make it red. I'm going to be special right now. I'm going to drag the instance node into the background, and then I'm going to drag the background onto the output of this merge. And then on this instance node, I'm going to uncheck solid and then increase the border width and decrease soft edge. And now I have this outline, but anywhere I move this ellipse, that outline will follow it as well as that highlighted portion. So we can move this wherever we want and the outline will follow it. So I know we're jumping around a lot because there's a lot to cover here, but hopefully it's making sense so far. The last topic we're going to discuss is the additional graphics. And this is when we talk about logos, text, or any other graphics you want to use to highlight the topic of your thumbnail. And logos are somewhat simple. We can just click and drag a PNG of our logo in here, and we can just drag it on top, add a transform here, shrink it down. And even after the transform, we can just add, let's add a glow instead of a blur. So if we hit Shift Space, we type in glow, we'll use this one. Under the glow settings, we can go to apply mode and merge under, and then we can just increase our glow size and glow amount, and we can adjust our blend. But this way we just add a little bit of shine to our logo here, and we can just move it up here. We can shrink it down. But this way it gives us a very clear indicator on what this is about. Adding text is pretty easy too. We can just go over here to our text plus node. We can drag this on top as well. Select whatever font we want, and we can just find something that's going to be really simple yet very informative to what this topic is going to be about. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this media pool down. And this can go up here somewhere, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's aesthetically pleasing. And if you are getting something where you're getting this unusual cutoff, it's most likely because you're going outside of the bounds of your nodes. This transform is basing it off of the original resolution. So we're looking at a canvas that's this. So anytime it goes outside of that canvas, it doesn't know what to do because there's no information there. So what we can do is just fake the resolution by adding a background, making it transparent, switching it over again. And now, as you can see, anywhere we move this on this canvas now, it won't get cut off. We can go into our text shading as well. We can add an outline. We can add a shadow of some sort. We can make this way thicker than it needs to be. We can darken the outline somewhat. We could even make the outline a gradient if we wanted to. And just really make it stand out while keeping it simple. And at any point, because we kept our transforms somewhat organized, we can always go back and see what our transform highlights and just move things accordingly if we need to, so that we're not covering ourselves up unnecessarily. Now that I've repositioned those, last thing we can possibly do with this is add an arrow of some sort or some sort of other graphic that points to it. And thankfully, because we still have that grid, go ahead and open it up, press F, we can draw an arrow. So let's just go ahead and boom, boom, boom. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. That looks quite nice. And then we can apply this over a background. I'm going to move all this over so it doesn't confuse us. Now if I place this background in over here, we have an arrow and we can make it whatever color we want. We can make it solid red. And if we wanted to place an outline on it, we can do a very similar trick that we did before. We can just copy this polygon, press Ctrl-Shift-V, make an instance of it, do the same thing. D-instance solid, D-instance border width. I don't need the D-instance soft edges in this case. We'll go ahead and just uncheck solid on that for now. And we'll bring in another background, just make it white, drag this instance on top of it. And then we're just going to output this background onto the output of the other one so that it stays on top. And now if we go to our instance background, increase our border width, boom. Now we have an outline on the arrow. And then anytime we want to readjust the shape, it affects it for the whole thing. We could even delete this point in case we wanted to have some sort of curvature to it by just dragging these points accordingly. And if I only wanted to move one point at a time, I could hold Control and I could just make whatever kind of shaped arrow I want. And then on this merge, we can just set a transform. After that, shrink the arrow down, maybe angle it a bit. Just have it point right at that Erode Dilate. But that's how you would draw an arrow. And now we have a thumbnail that's somewhat presentable. And there are so many other things we can do. Like we could even go all the way back into our picture and adjust how we look. So if we go after this magic mask here, I can just add a brightness contrast node and just do some basic color adjustments to it if we wanted to. Add some saturation, like really make the color stand out. And then that way, we're really making everything super colorful. So there's so many options that you have with being able to make all of this stuff in Fusion. Fusion is such a powerful tool. Really the possibilities are endless. And I know it can seem daunting with all the crazy amounts of nodes that you can add into it, but hopefully this was somewhat easy enough to understand so that you can go in and start making your own thumbnails directly in Resolve. If you would like to know how to set a lot of this stuff up as presets so you don't have to draw and do all of this stuff manually every single time, let me know and I can make a video about that as well. If you have any other questions about this whole thumbnail process, or you just have any sort of inquiry on how all of this stuff works or why it works the way that it does, please let me know in the comments and let me know if there was something you didn't understand or anything I can clarify. But I am really excited to see what kind of thumbnails you make with all of these techniques. And once again, these lower thirds are here because I put them there. They're yours to view. And then take action on them and actually go into the description and click on the links that are there. Never mind, this is Camera Tim signing out. I love you guys, bye.